Welcome to Nasdaq TradeTalks, where we meet with the top thought leaders and strategists in emerging technologies, digital assets, the regulatory landscape, and capital markets. This segment is presented by Charles Schwab. I'm your host, Jill Malandrino, and joining me on the desk at the Nasdaq market site, we have Dr. Severence MacLaughlin, WHO and UN advisor and the founder and CEO of DeLorean AI, Javier Cuello, founder and CEO of H+Trace, and Courtne Marland, co-founder and CEO of Lyra. We're here to discuss how innovators across healthcare diagnostics and enterprise AI are safeguarding sensitive data, securing digital pipelines, and strengthening the systems that our economy depends on. It is great to have all of you with us. Great to explore this topic as October Cybersecurity Awareness Month, and certainly cybersecurity is something that's near and dear to the show here. And you know, Dr. MacLaughlin, you and I talk a lot about how AI pipelines, their vulnerabilities and the attack surfaces continue to expand in healthcare, and how predictive AI can probably help to neutralize this. Yeah, it's a double-sided, or each side of a coin, Jill. So first of all, thank you very much for having me back. If we look at this cybersecurity or cyber threat in terms of healthcare, this is not a victimless crime, right? There have been a number of instances where people have died because of a cyber attack. And in a recent journal article from JAMA 2023 even says that this increases the mortality rate for our Medicare patients. So this is why we need to take this seriously. And with the advent of AI and the speed which data can be analyzed and predicted, it's a maturity paradigm. So we've created a whole lot of fantastic AIs to help with healthcare and then the treatment of chronic diseases. But at the same time, we haven't developed those safeguards for the sentinel, if you will, to protect our PHI and our patients. So, you know, and we'll probably get into the discussion that, you know, what is the offensive and defensive AIs that we can do to put into place? Yeah, and Javier, when we talk about cybersecurity, supply chain is always something that comes up, and there's no difference there with diagnostic supply chains from collection to analysis. Of course, that's healthcare's most vulnerable and least protected systems.
Yes, well, when we decided our technology, we had that in mind. Mm-hmm. Not just to be HIPAA compliant, because we want to improve the processes without knowing what's the personal data behind that, the PHI. So what we did was work too much on how things are done, how things are transported with labs and the samples, not who. And that's a very groundbreaking approach for healthcare, because everybody's going for patient information. Yeah. And we decided to go the other way. Yeah. And this is one of the areas in London 2023 where there was an attack, that it was Synovis in the supply chain for a blood sample that was mischaracterized because of the cyber attack, and that led to a death in 2023 in London.
Back to what you were saying, that it is more than just reputation cost and cost to the company. And you know, AI native communication systems are so much good that can be done there, but it's also the new frontier for cyber criminals.
Yes. And I think with communication, you have a huge opportunity to provide people a lot of value that they don't necessarily know that they're looking for. Because if you think about Google or even a doctor, you actually have to go ask for help. I think with AI, we have the ability to read communication as it's happening. They're talking to a friend, a family member, and then bring up advice that they otherwise wouldn't have got, and help in real time predictively beforehand. Because I have the opinion that with medicine, the best is really predictive and trying to help before it's a huge problem rather than wait until it's an enormous problem. And I think the first time that we can do that is through conversation, because someone can mention they're feeling sick or they had a certain way that they experienced their day, and we can do a lot of value there.
But shouldn't patients also take it upon themselves to go for their annual physicals and make sure that they are getting in front of problems? I mean, that mindset has existed before AI, certainly.
I don't think that this is an if or an or. Right. I think everyone knows that you should go to your weekly, monthly, yearly checkup, whatever it is. I just don't think most people do, because life is busy. People, you know, change plans. There's also a cost factor there. We have the ability to do it 24/7 that has never existed before. And I think that that's going to be life-changing, because most people don't do their yearly checkups, even though we all know that you should.
Yeah. I think there are challenges associated with that. I don't disagree. Yeah. The more data that's there for diagnostic purposes, and this is all in unstructured data. Again, that brings in a whole other area for protection or whatnot. But if you're looking at home aids versus avatars, we see that elderly people on Medicare answer more honestly to avatars. So, you know, if the home aide says, "How are you feeling?" she may say, "I'm fine, sweetie," but if the avatar asks, she may say, you know, I have a pain in my lower back. That could be a UI or it could be a kidney problem. But the challenge there also is, like, how do we get that securely back to the right person, right? And how do we analyze that, and how are we actually consented to do so?
Right.
I think a very important thing with that is actually pattern recognition, because if you ask the question, how are you feeling, you expect the person to get an answer, but usually you can figure out how they're feeling without asking them. Like if someone's having a bad day at the office, you can tell their mood, their expressions, and then you can do that through conversation, and you never actually have to ask them, because when people get cornered and they get asked, I also think usually they don't really give you the accurate answer.
Yeah. What about data traceability and in an effort to prevent manipulation of that data?
Well, that's a great question. We think there's a big opportunity there because, as we say, every company wants to cut corners and just go for the easiest thing to do. And following what you said, it's a lot hard work to just focus on what happens and not what happens and whom. And to go follow that road, it's very hard. And I think we, as founders and as company builders, we should push more that kind of empathy or patient information across all companies, not only AI or regulation-wise, but across all companies.
Yeah, but I mean, we also have the challenge of IoT-enabled diagnostics, right? So there's just so many more surfaces or so many ways that data can get compromised if it's going from, diagnostic results go to the doctor, then it goes to you, and then perhaps it goes to the insurance company, or, there's just so many more avenues that it can be exposed.
We solved it using a HIPAA compliant middleware. So we focus on the how the sample is transported, not to whom or why.
But I think it's also understandable, like as this is the maturity paradigm, as the technologies evolve, the hackers are really smart, right? They're evolving ahead of this. So how do we actually anticipate that? What is they have offensive AI, right? They're using deep fakes, they're using phishing to identify what you're saying, all these vulnerabilities. Once they identify, maybe it's an SFTP landing site, then they're looking for the employee on LinkedIn and they phish them, or a deep fake or a voice. But to be on the other side, we need to have an evolving AI that's defensive, right? So anomaly detection, behavior detection, and then the ML or the engine that's being able to process that data in real time and look at it.
Yeah, but also the challenge is cyber criminals and nation states, they're not operating like we would proactively, from a defensive posture. They don't have regulators. They don't have, layers of compliance that they need to go through. They could just execute on their mission.
And I think this is a national security issue, right? So on two parts, if I could. Number one is healthcare is a soft target, right? And I worry not only about our large companies, but I also worry about our rural hospitals, right? Because they are compromised. They may not have the money, but they're also usually easy targets. The other problem is we can't go after these bad perpetrators, right? It's illegal for private companies to go after them because they're usually based in China or in Russia, and it's the Pakistan syndrome. Do we know that they're there or we don't? And there's no law to be able to extradite them. And if they're not there, the money is also going to contribute to their economy. So why would Russia and China help us out? Right. My question is, I want someone to say Kash Patel, we do have an FBI squad that's working with white hats that's countering this, right? Because it's driving up our healthcare costs at the same time. And the second one is, I want someone knocking on their door, right? Like an FBI squad or whatever elite group that is, because, look at Change Healthcare that happened a couple years ago. How many people were impacted by that? But we don't see any people brought to justice.
Right.
I think the maturity thing there is really important, because if you look at IoT or you look at healthcare, these are very specific sectors which come with completely different liability than others. So we process thousands of conversations a day. Some are a conversation between patient and doctor. Some of it is talking about their illness with their friends, but most of it is not. And so if you set blanket laws or you scare people with the AI data mining, then you end up hurting a lot of things that weren't as dangerous as these things. And then we constrain all of our top companies. And I think you mentioned the national security risk. There's a real chance that we prevent a lot of our leaders from actually accelerating and staying ahead. And I think one of the bigger risks is if one of these overseas companies uses the data that they got, which our companies cannot, to progress medical health a lot further, and then they don't give it to us. Then we've actually shot ourselves all in the foot.
Right.
I don't think you're wrong there. So I don't think you're wrong. So I think if you look at Europe, with GDPR and then their new AI regulations, that was a race to the bottom of the barrel.
There's zero AI companies there as a result.
There's not going to be going anywhere. And no one in our technology and healthcare AI wants to go over and work over there because it's so restrictive. But I do think that when you're saying that, there is a balance, right? There has to be regulation has to happen, it's going to happen, but I think that the people that are regulating us need to have voices that are around this table to actually have sanity put there that you can't have that blanket.
Correct.
So, I mean, but part of it comes down to privacy by design. I mean, your architecture just has to be built out with that. It's not
Correct.
something that you need to have and check the boxes. It's going to be where your competitive edge is.
I am a really big proponent for design because I think if you can communicate what's happening, number one, people feel a lot safer, and they also then have the awareness on what they can say or should say because they know the AI is listening. I think the biggest problem we have with design is the ability for people to have the correct education to interpret it correctly. Because you see this again in Europe with GDPR, where every website has a big ugly banner like opt in yes or no. And this is terrible design. It also ruins user experience. And most people don't actually know what they're actually doing. And there's literally no way as a designer you could overcome that because some law said you have to display a banner. And so I think we need to codify design. You see this a lot inside AI apps with the way it looks. I think it's going to be a huge, huge value prop in how we drive this forward. I just think that design language needs to be communicated down to most people. And I think the conversation should be, instead of regulation, how can we educate? Because all the money that's being spent and time, frankly, on regulation could be spent on education.
But I think the other part of it is not only regulation, but insurance. Your insurance, if you don't have cybersecurity insurance, and E&O insurance, you're not going to be able to get contracts with larger companies or the federal government, and they are dictating to us what we have to have in our cybersecurity. I mean, the change that happened from 2019 to now, they're extremely sophisticated in what they're asking for and what they expect in that security protocol.
Yeah, well, it goes back to my point before, where it's going to be a competitive advantage.
It is, absolutely.
It's not something you could check the boxes, and yes, there's going to be upfront cost, but to not have it and then have to play catch up,
Yes,
Yeah.
it's just exponential. So kind of rip the Band-Aid off at the beginning. Right, but I think designing cyber first, privacy first mentality is going to be with it. The companies need to, even think about the culture from the top down in terms of how an enterprise functions. Right, I mean, you just have to design that way.
Yeah, but ultimately it's a choice. It's a choice by founders, by starters. I mean, even if we don't have the same mentality around the table, you have to keep that in mind. And I think it's great when even regulations push that mentality in founders.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at, one of your talking points here, leadership culture, human awareness. It's the strongest defense in an automated cyber landscape. I mean, the humans are going to always be the biggest source of vulnerabilities.
Correct, but they're also the biggest source of data. And I think that if you can gather a lot of that, you can do a lot of pattern recognition, and this will allow us to solve diseases before they come, allow us to identify new types of technologies. I think there's just a lot of good that can come with getting, I mean, you said this earlier, getting all your health data or any data in one place is currently a big problem that most organizations have. And once it's in one place, you unlock the ability to do things and see things that just haven't happened before. And that can only happen if you consolidate data.
Yeah, but I think you're, again, taking there's a cyber issue out of that and there's a trust issue.
Yes.
I think we have to have trust in our systems, but the technology does exist right now to predict chronic disease onset and to lengthen life or whatnot through medical AI. The challenge that we're seeing is the interoperability, right, and actually bringing the data together. I mean, take Epic, for instance. It's awful to get Epic data out of Epic or Cerner or these Clintonian EMRs versus Athena or Renvio or whatnot. So,
do you think that's by engineering design or because they were trying to struggle with dealing with so many different regulations and so many different laws and changing landscapes?
In terms of electronic medical records, I think there's two sets, right?
Yeah.
The Clintonian legislation that led to the 2014 adoption or the mandate to do that caused Epic, Meditech, and Cerner to build as fast as they could and get there, and they did the best job they could, right? But after that, you have these younger EMRs who are tech forward, and because you have these behemoths, you can't go back and fix it, right? Like you're dealing with legacy technology that you have to.
Yeah, I mean, but that's always been a challenge, though, the integration of traditional and then forward-looking companies at the end of the day. And when you think about startups that are trying to take advantage of the existing climate that they're in right now, perhaps cyber or privacy first is not at the forefront. They're thinking about getting a product out there, having a model, use cases, and getting it out to market.
Well, I completely agree with you. I mean, all founders have lived this, right? I agree with Javier, where, if you are cyber first, you have to be privacy first, you have to be cyber first, and as like you said, it's a competitive advantage. When people say, well, how do we trust you? If you do that first from the beginning and you build the best that you can always do better. You can always spend more money on cybersecurity or technology, but if you're checking all the boxes and going one step further, that trust goes a long way, not only with the patient, but also the doctor who's that gateway, that they can trust your technology.
I agree with being security first, but I also think like most young founders who are starting, they're trying to just get a product with users. They're trying to just get off the ground. And I think we're stifling ourselves because less people are starting companies in these industries because there's such a wall to get over before you can even start. And it's okay to say, well, check all the boxes, build security first, etc. When you have millions of dollars and a huge engineering team to do all these things, most people just want to get started. And we, I think, are having less startups in these critical spaces because of these problems. And if we had had more founders attacking and building here, I think the process would move a lot faster and we'd have way more innovation.
I think that I agree with both sides of that coin. Part of the challenge with that is, you could get to the finish line, right? You have investors lined up, however you choose to take the company. But if you do get to that finish line and all of a sudden, oh, you know what, you're not compliant to be able to operate in the US, that's going to put a massive dent in the timeline. So it's almost a chicken before the egg argument, which at this point in time, I think we're trying to figure out and ideate.
I also agree with Courtne. It's industry specific, like we've talked about earlier. I think healthcare, needs to be protected as a golden standard, right? I think back to your point about consumer packaged goods, which soap they recommend is a lesser threat to accessing someone's vulnerabilities.
Yeah, well, you brought up the point before, and it's not just specific to healthcare. You could use, any number of industries that GDPR has stifled innovation on the continent and has made companies, perhaps take a step back from operating in the EU. But what about CCPA out in California? California is a home to the most tech companies, and they're finding a way to comply. I mean, maybe that could be a model.
It could be. I mean, we've had to comply with that, right? We have employees. We have. We don't have any data centers there. But the majority through what you were saying is what you're setting up with your tech. But yeah, it's coming, and we have to comply with the laws. We don't have a choice with that. Yeah. So
I also think it comes back to education, as you had mentioned before, right? Up until I was exposed to covering this kind of content, I never thought about opt-in, opt-out, and who reads a privacy notice, right? No matter how much they try and condense it within the confines of compliance, I think there's a big education gap there as well.
I agree. I said this before, but like if you ask someone, do you want to opt in or out? Most people don't have the knowledge on what that actually means. And so designers are taking like shortcuts to make them say, yes, I want to opt in by making the button slightly bigger or smaller because they're trying to shift people in what is actually in their best interest, which is having a better experience because it's personalized to them. Because if you ask someone, do you want to give me all your data? Naturally, they just say no, but they don't have the knowledge behind that choice. And so we have to take all these tracks and tricks to try and get them to where we know is actually the best for them because there's a law that says we have to show this. And one of the things I want to just come back to is I just finished Y Combinator, and there is probably the best group of young founders trying to build startups. A lot of them did not want to build in medical because they had to spend an enormous amount of time building these long policies, building all the security, where they otherwise could have been solving critical problems, shipping product and helping more people. And I think that, again, there's a sliding scale here.
Yeah, I mean, coming from, that's our business is medical AI, right? And we have 54 million patients processed. If it was easy, everybody would have done it, right? And we reduced hospitalizations by 50%, but we did it because we did it the right way. And we did it, brick by brick and the hard work associated with it. And healthcare is tough. But, at the end of the day, you're extending people's lives and you're giving more hugs out. There's a reward for that.
Of course. What about public-private partnerships and also partnering with academia to help advance this? I think it really depends on what audience you're talking to in order to get the buy-in across the board.
Yeah, well we have, our company has several partnerships with governments and different industries and global companies also. And that we didn't have the choice. We have to go cyber first, privacy first, because if not, we shouldn't grow as fast as we can. So for us, it was not an option.
Yeah, well, and again, I think it was an excellent point that you brought up, where it's not even just education for the consumer, but also educating policymakers and educating practitioners, because, Sev, you and I have discussed this a number of times. To get the buy-in, it's going to be a very different conversation sitting here versus the community, versus healthcare workers versus policymakers.
It's huge. It's going to take a community, right? And then is it rural? Like, what is the needs that they have versus here in the city? And like you said, the doctors, the registered nurses, the licensed professionals, the patients. This is not easy stuff, right? So it's.
Well, at least we're sitting here trying to solve it around this table.
I think the only thing that hasn't come up, which I think is important, is a spirit of competitiveness. That is like one thing I feel lacking, because the reality is this is a race. In healthcare or in different sectors, we're all racing, whether that's against bad actors to figure out like deepfake prevention, whether it's to solve some disease before someone dies, we're all racing. And every time we try and like hinder ourselves and slow ourselves down, other countries are not going to do that. That stops less people from getting the result, the cure, or whatever that is before it actually hits them. And I just think there needs to be a general spirit of competitiveness, and even like in the regulatory space.
A level playing field for the US versus other.
Yeah.
But also just like the conversations, how can we move faster versus all the things we need to implement to slow down.
All right, and we will definitely continue this conversation and work out on all the problems worlds. Appreciate everyone's insight. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.